So we've gone so far halfway around the loop, from the database to the user interface. Let's complete that loop by going from the user interface back to the database. And if you'll remember, I said that the user interface really has two functions. It has an output function, that's what we've been talking about so far, to show the end user things that are in the database. It also has an input function to allow the end user to put things in the database. Now the end user might be a consumer, like in the case of Pandora, consuming songs, or it might be actually the person who creates the information about the songs in the first place. There could be staff members that use a user interface to input basic information into the database, or it could be an end user that's inputting their desires or their profile or whatever. In this case, we're going to look at the latter. It's a little bit of a simpler thing to look at. The user who creates an account on Pandora has to actually enter a lot of information into the database, and the user interface allows them to enter that information. So we've gone from database to user interface. Let's now go from user interface to database, starting with this form. Notice that this form is all about people. So we hadn't talked about people before. We talked about songs and artists and recordings. Now we're going to have to add people into our data structure, into our database structure, because we also have to find out about the users of Pandora in addition to the artists that are on Pandora. So how do we get information about the users from the outside world into our database, into our system? Through this form. When someone says, I want to register for Pandora, up comes this form, and they fill in input controls. If you remember from our earlier discussions, we have controls on the page, and those controls allow us to do things. In this case, we have controls that allow us to input information. At the bottom of the page, we have other controls that trigger different actions inside of our system. So we have a set of input controls, and in each of those input controls, if you squint your eyes, you can almost see the table eventually down the road in the database that information is going to go into. For example, your email. Don't you think there's going to be a table for people in the database? And one of the columns in that table is going to be email address, and that whatever you type in here is destined for that. Can you see how this is sort of a window into a particular piece of the database? Putting it in a friendly way. If we just gave people the database, they'd be guaranteed to not understand and to mess it up. But when we put the input in this well-defined, well-designed user interface, it helps people to supply information into the database in the right way.